You're listening to Data Science Leaders, the premier podcast for executives tackling the world's most important challenges using the power of machine learning. Let's dive in. What does the near-term future of AI look like in the life sciences? What is currently going into production that is going to change the industry? This episode is part of a series of interviews with experts on the future of AI, looking at the life sciences, financial services, and the public sector. In today's episode, I speak with Chris McSpiritt, VP of Life Sciences Strategy at Domino, who has spent the last 20 years helping pharma and CROs improve their research and development operations. On with the podcast. First, before we get to those predictions about 2025, what have you seen in 2024? Where are we? What has excited you the most? And what have you been most impressed by?
Yeah, I think two things that are related that really struck me for this year. The first is sort of the manifestation or the result of previous work. And the second, something that's more nascent and emerging, is being able to use AI and technology for drug development. So as many people know, the actual AlphaFold, which is a Google DeepMind product, actually won the Nobel Prize this year for being able to predict the 3D structure of proteins. So I think that's really impressive in terms of, hey, what has happened in the past that is now manifest and real. So I think that's very cool. And I think it transitions into some of what we're seeing of new iterations, new developments, is the emergence of AI-driven digital organisms. So obviously the human body, when you develop drugs, you have to figure out how does the body work? How do proteins fold, RNA, DNA, all of that. And you do it traditionally in disparate ways, running lots of machine learning programs. Obviously you test things in the lab, but there's now actual models and platforms that combine multiple foundational models to check concurrently protein synthesis, the RNA modeling, DNA, all of that in one fell swoop. So I think that's something that there's a new version, an open source model that's actually on GitHub and Hugging Face, et cetera, just got released last month. I think that's really going to accelerate some of that research capability and make it more accessible to smaller companies.
I mean, it almost sounds like this is a kind of a maturity thing. It's like, well, we've known this is possible for a while. We've been plenty of experimentation. There have been more siloed uses of these models. Folks have been, again, experimenting with them, trying them out. But it sounds like now we're at a different stage of maturity. We're no longer in the prepubescent phase. We're now out in the real world and starting to make a difference. Or are we there yet? Or is there still a maturation period that we're probably going to need to go through, and we usually do, for another year or two before we get there?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a little bit more maturation. I think we've been dipping our toes in the water for a lot of these technologies over the past few years. People have been using machine learning to do a lot of bioinformatics discovery work already, but it was always sort of limited to larger companies or technology companies who are really focused on data science and AI. I think as we're seeing it become more mature, more accessible, we're seeing more companies who don't necessarily view themselves as tech companies being able to benefit from that. I think then, actually, not to spoil things, that's one of my predictions a little bit later, is pharma companies evolving slightly to be more like technology companies. I think that's something we'll talk about later.
Oh, excellent. So it's, I like to think about this as democratization, but that's probably an extreme. It's more that it's gone from being an area which was niche, maybe startups that were focused on this and had this at the core of their business models, to now being a mainstream modality. It might not be the dominant modality yet, but it's becoming the dominant modality, it sounds like, or it's sort of influencing the dominant modality. Is that a fair characterization?
100%. Yeah, I think, and this is one of my first predictions, I think starting this year, we will see the vast majority of drugs or compounds, treatments, whatever you want to call it, who are going into clinical trial phase actually have been supported by AI during the bioinformatics and discovery side. It used to be a ratio percentage. Someone threw it, some didn't. I think now with the availability of the capabilities from the models, things like that, the explosion of access to resources. Obviously, there was just $500 billion announced for AI infrastructure. I think it's going to be much more feasible for all organizations to take advantage of this. And again, they've been doing it for years and years at smaller scales or focusing on certain therapeutic areas, obviously oncology or protein, things like that. They've been focusing on it. I think it's going to become the dominant way of doing drug discovery is using AI and machine learning.
Oh, I mean, that is a super bold prediction to go in and say that like the majority of them are going to be leveraging this, but we should probably investigate that further. So, I mean, obviously, we on the AI space, we tend to go and think of to the extreme and think, okay, well, this is because we're using fine-tuned transformer models to go in and propose new candidate models. That's definitely included, but I'm imagining you're also including in this the all of just the research tools, all of the other ways that AI is being used in this. So yes, you've got the ones where this is front and center of the drug discovery process, but I'm assuming you're including also then ones where, well, this is more traditional researcher productivity augmentation or clinical trial acceleration or things like that that also add into this. So when you add up all of the ways in which AI, machine learning, and advanced analytics is involved, it becomes dominant? Or are you so bullish that it's like, no, I think actually, those candidate molecules, yeah, a huge number of those are going to be proposed by AI and ML models?
Yeah, maybe so. I'm just a really, really optimistic person. So I think if we were to include clinical research, all the safety, pharmacovigilance, things like that, I would be hard pressed to think of any company who's not embracing AI, analytics, et cetera, to some degree this year. Again, they might not be full deployment, things like that. So I would be hard pressed to find any company who's doing anything innovative not doing that. My prediction was the actual discovery side, so the research side, discovery, bioinformatics, figuring out, hey, which molecules do we attack? What are the right targets? Things like that. Figuring out using machine learning. We've had customers doing this for years. How do we actually identify tumors that might be a good fit for treatment? Those types of things. I think a majority of trials will take advantage of AI and analytics in that regard.
Oh, that's super exciting. I mean, I remember folks talking about predominantly it was protein and peptide-based treatments using this approach. It seemed like a particularly well-suited area. Would you say that this has really gone far? It sounds like this has gone really far beyond this, and now applicable to a much, much broader class of treatments than we were talking about before. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's an evolution. So yeah, we started with genomics, proteomics, things like that. So now there's the concept of multiomics. So it's all of those things sort of being aggregated together, and that's what that diagnosis sort of platform I talked about earlier is around being able to aggregate and combine those to allow you to do more mass analysis in parallel. But yeah, I think it's being able to understand as we continue to learn more about the human body and how it functions. And again, we have huge troves of data that's available, both public data. Each organization generates humongous amounts of data. I think we're able to apply a lot of this discovery work around molecules, around targets, et cetera. Even heck, going into pharmacokinetics, that's a lot of things where people are predicting how the drug is absorbed, how it interacts with the body, et cetera. So I think those types of things, where we're able to do things in silico versus in vitro, is going to be a big shift.
Excellent. Well, I should have mentioned at the start of this session that please do enter in your questions either in the Q&A and the chat. And shout out to Charles Dombeck, who already has done so and was asking about not just predicting on the molecule side of things, but also the side effects across those molecules. Seeing any work there already?
I've seen people dabble around that. So I think they're trying to use comparators, things like that from a molecular structure. Like, hey, similar compounds that with this protein structure or this interaction with the target had this type of impact. It's something that I think we'll see more of. I've seen more right now, identification and relying on clinical trials or more of the preclinical work to actually sort of suss out those side effects.
Oh, excellent. Well, I mean, since you brought up clinical trials, any predictions there in terms of the use? Because we've been talking about the incredible opportunities on the advanced analytics and machine learning side for a really long time, but it's taken a while for it to really take hold. Seeing an acceleration there?
Oh, heck yeah. So I think this is where we go back to, hey, what percentage of people are going to be using AI? I think AI, analytics, et cetera, is going to become standard or de rigueur in clinical trials. I think we have a lot of it is just pharma companies are looking to improve their efficiency. So that's one thing. I think pharma companies are being forced, obviously, to adhere with regulation. So I think a key regulation that the pharma industry was really focused on over the past few years is diversity in clinical trials. We obviously want to make sure the drugs we're developing work for representative patient populations. And that always hasn't been the case from when we actually execute those trials. So I think one of the things we've seen and we're going to continue to see is pharma companies, their CRO partners, health organizations, et cetera, actually tap into natural language processing, other AI components to actually mine against EHR data, health record data, prescription data, things like that, to actually jumpstart patient recruitment efforts. A lot of the patient recruitment efforts today have been like, hey, we just need to get as many patients in as quick as possible to accelerate our trial. And we're still going to do that. We obviously want to do all that. But I think it's also augmented by the desire to have a more representative patient population. So I think that's the first area where we're really going to see AI sort of force its way into clinical trials. And I think another way it's tied to this, and again, industry trends, what the industry has been trying to go after for a while, is adaptive clinical trials, where you're more reactive to what actually is happening on the ground. So being able to use predictive analytics, AI, et cetera, to understand, hey, how are patients reacting to treatment? And then based on that, being able to auto adjust dosing. So I think that's something we're seeing. Adaptive trials have been around for years, but it's always been people going back to the lab, doing their analytics, doing their hard work, again, breaking out beakers and stuff like that. So I think we're going to be able to tap into AI for that. I also think we're going to have AI start figuring out, both in traditional trials, but also in these adaptive trials, how do we adjust inclusion exclusion criteria? That's always been a big hurdle to running clinical trials is, hey, we want to cast a wide net, but not too wide. So I think being able to leverage the analytics, or hey, what does the actual universe look like of patients, to help figure out how do we actually get something that's realistic and representative of the world into the trial.
No, that's wonderful. I mean, I particularly like that first point that you were describing, because it is, we're effectively talking about leveraging AI to get a less biased patient population. And usually in the AI space, we talk about over and over again the risk of bias in AI. But the benefit of AI models is that it usually reveals those biases. And if we use it correctly, it reveals our own. So this is one of those wonderful examples of actually being able to counter our own biases and deal with the biases in our data using artificial intelligence. And I guess on the second point that you were making, this feels like this ability to get these insights in more real time and be more reactive, definitely on the clinical trial side of things. But it feels like that's a broader point around the entire life cycle, that through better use of your data and the more proactive ability to analyze your data using quote unquote artificial intelligence, you can probably be more, not just reactive, maybe proactive, but you can be more responsive and more iterative, presumably on that life cycle, and take actions earlier on to go in and pivot your efforts towards more promising areas and potentially kill off unpromising areas of research way earlier. Or so is it? Are you seeing it outside of do you expect this outside of just the clinical trials process and into the entire end-to-end process instead?
100%. Yeah, I think that's an evolution we're seeing in general, is pharma being more driven by analytics and data than they were in the past. I think pharma used to be a very science-driven, which makes sense, obviously, or a very person/process focused organization, because again, a lot of those processes were established to comply with regulations. But I think, yes, across the board, I think we're going to see analytics guide a lot more decision making, AI guided, whatever. I think allowing us to double down when things are progressing well, but also cut our losses when things aren't. I view a lot of drug development, and it's going to sound bad, as sort of a gamble. You have so much money to invest as a world in clinical drug development, that you want to make sure your bets are going in the right places. So the faster I can say, hey, this isn't going anywhere, it allows me to refocus and reallocate those resources to something more promising. So yeah, I think from a discovery perspective, from a trial execution, heck, from a manufacturing perspective, it allows us to figure out which plants are being more efficient. Do I shift allocation for certain drugs into this region versus this region? Having more and more data, more and more access to that allows folks to make decisions that were sometimes just stick a finger up in the wind and just guess in the past.
I mean, as a former researcher, not within the life sciences realm, but I can sympathize with this view that, well, we didn't cut off these areas of research before because we did not want to go in and step in the toes of the researcher. And now, as a researcher, on one hand, I definitely would view that, well, I don't want to be spending this huge amount of time, these years of my life, going in and pursuing an avenue of research, which isn't going to be productive. But on the other hand, this might be my area of interest and excitement excitement, and I'm worried about people going in and telling me that I can't pursue this anymore. But I guess I'm curious from that point of view of the researcher, are there ways in which this sort of makes the researcher better, happier, more fulfilled? I mean, I imagine there are all sorts of tasks that researchers do that are like the bane of our existence. I mean, thinking of all of the, everything that goes into documentation and publishing, etc. I guess, are there any predictions there around how AI will affect that?
Yeah, and I think that's something that we talk to a lot of our customers about is, hey, does AI remove jobs or does it remove tasks? I think it removes tasks from a lot of folks and frees them up to do what they're really good at, having your scientists, your researchers do research work. Obviously, there's already been proof from ChatGPT, et cetera, that LLMs can do a really good job at scientific research. There's vast troves, as we talked about, of scientific medical data out there. So being able to jumpstart your research by just pointing an LLM, Gen AI, at the research out there and be like, hey, summarize me what's been interesting over the past few years. What are the venues or the avenues that have already been attacked? So I think it allows you to start that process quicker, allows you to sort of collaborate with a bunch of peers who have just happened to be computers and CPUs, things like that. So I think it allows you to do that upfront work faster, allows you to get and analyze your results a lot faster. So that allows you to iterate things like that. I think to your point about people wanting to be passionate about what they do, I think that's still going to be there. I think there's going to be an abundance of time available for people to do the really hard work because AI is going to take the more menial tasks away from them. You talked about documentation, things like that. We already have customers who are using Gen AI to automate protocol authoring, to automate clinical study report authoring. That's where you're taking snippets from the clinical trial, the protocol, other things. You're pulling in data from your stats analysis, and you're just pretty much copying and pasting it using structured authoring. Lots of sometimes antiquated, sometimes quasi-modern ways to generate that document. We have customers right now who are automating that by connecting their clinical study publishing system to their trial master file, to their EDC systems, to their stat systems, to automate that initial drafting. And then again, we're not going to remove the human from the loop. You're going to have your regulatory specialists, your scientific folks provide input, review it, and be part of that process. But I think there's going to be a lot less documentation required and a lot less documentation that's going to be generated manually by people typing in Microsoft Word or Google Docs.
But it still sounds like it's primarily augmentation. So this is one where you're leveraging human intelligence for the stuff that human intelligence is good at, but for the stuff which really doesn't require the things that human intelligence is needed for, or that indeed humans are really, really bad at. You know, process compliance, we're really, really bad at. Menial, repetitive work, we're really bad at. Looking for information, summarizing information, we're actually not terribly good at. But it sounds like offloading those tasks, but it still is very much one of a human-led process. It sounds like it's just one which is using human intelligence a lot more intelligently. Or are you seeing no? Actually, there are certain ones where we can have pretty autonomous automated feedback loops where actually the human is more of just a reviewer after the fact.
Yeah, we have seen that. We've definitely seen that from a reviewer confirmation. There's been companies, my old company did, again, it's basic, but automatic doc classification. So that's something that's been happening for years and years in the industry. And most people are saying, hey, you know what? I trust the model good enough or strongly enough to let it do the vast majority of that without having to put a second set of eyes on top of it. Obviously, just like the rest of life, we're taking things in a risk-based approach. The FDA, the regulatory agencies, they love risk-based approaches. So we're going to focus our effort on things that have the most impact around patient safety, efficacy, things like that. The rest of it, just like you would if there were just a bunch of interns that you hired, you're going to let them do this stuff and like in the old days, you let them do a lot of work. I'd let AI do a lot of that the same way.
Excellent. Are there any other predictions about what we should be seeing in 2025?
Yeah, I think one of it actually goes to Joe's question a little bit in the chat, is sort of a blurring of lines between research and treatment. To me, there's two parts of that. Obviously, there's a lot of focus on real world evidence, real world data, et cetera. So how do we take things like I talked about earlier, EHR systems, wearables, prescription data, things like that? How do we start looking at the vast troves of data that are from just normal patient care procedures or patient data life activities? How do we embed that in the clinical trial or regulatory process? So I think that's something that we're going to see over the next few years, is that becoming required. It's no longer, hey, it's just our randomized trial that gets us to approval. We're going to be augmenting and supporting that with data that's being generated by doctors, by nurses, by patients actually in their day-to-day activities. So I think that's one of the big things that we see. And I think also tied to that is, and again, it's a combination of treatment versus research, depending who you talk to, is personalized medicine. So obviously that's something that we see becoming much more common in the world, much more required with the huge increase of cancer incidences, things like that. How do we actually treat Shell as a person? His physiology is different than mine. I'm a lot taller and fatter. How do we treat his genetic composition is different than mine? So how do we actually take those individualized nuances? Tumors are different, things like that. How do we actually use all of that to find the treatment that's right for you? There's healthcare systems that are already using personalized medicine to guide the treatment approach. So again, working with doctors to say, hey, this is what we recommend. But I also think we're going to get to a point where we're going to have personalized prescriptions, again, biologics, things like that. And that's going to require us to do a heck of a lot better from a diagnosis perspective, but also I alluded to it earlier, from a manufacturing perspective. I was on another webinar, and in talking to folks, being able to manage or manufacture 1 million batches of one drug is a heck of a lot easier than managing 1 million or one batch of 1 million drugs. So your whole scale is different. There's all you're building one thing, but you have to make sure every single one's right. So it's completely different from an analysis perspective, from a manufacturing process perspective. So I think that's where the other thing that we see around is, how do we actually treat patients like individuals?
Well, I mean, a big question here is how regulation will affect all of this. Ideally, you need a regulatory system that enables that kind of flexibility. And John Vlahos, my apologies for butchering your last name, asked a wonderful question in here, was specifically about how you think AI regulation will impact AI in the life sciences. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts. I think there's, I'll call it industry agnostic regulations. Obviously, the EU has taken different approaches with us around AI, copyright, things like that, that impact how do you potentially even deploy AI in those regions. We know certain tech companies aren't even making their most up-to-date offerings available in Europe versus the US. So I think that's part, but I also think you have industry-specific things. AI as a medical device, things like that. You have the FDA and other agencies saying, you know what? Being able to have an app that actually tracks my blood pressure, or having an AI that helps with image detection for like tumors, things like that, those are being approved by the FDA. So we saw that a bunch of those being approved next year. I continue to think we're going to see more and more of that. I think it's interesting. It ties into my last prediction, and I talked about it earlier, about pharma companies becoming tech companies. We're going to see them figure out, like, hey, it's not just molecules that we build. It's not just traditional medicines, pills, et cetera. Obviously, those will continue to happen, and we're going to use AI, analytics, et cetera, to bring those to market. But also figuring out, how do we support the entire patient life cycle? So we know there's a lot of things besides medicine, your diet, your sleep, all these things. There's apps out there that are sleep guiding apps, things like that, and they're being prescribed. You have more and more things that are therapeutics or treatments that are more behavior focused. So I think that's going to be something you're going to see pharma companies get into more. I also think, as I talked about earlier, you're going to see pharma companies figuring out, hey, we need to be a heck of a lot better with technology than we are today to bring our traditional treatments even to market. We've already solved a lot of the easy problems. Now we're getting to the hard stuff. So I think you're going to see companies creating partnerships. You see a lot of pharma companies that partner with small biotech startups. You see them partnering with software startups. So you see them partnering Memorial Sloan Kettering. They do a huge amount of data sharing across the industry, making things available. The regulatory agencies, the governments are sharing information. So I think you're going to start seeing pharma companies figure out, hey, the way we do things can be a way to differentiate ourselves. We had for 15, 20 years ago, pharma companies thought, hey, how we do things differentiates us. Then it shifted to, hey, our science is what differentiates us. I think it's maybe swinging back a little bit more to, hey, if we're able to apply novel ways of doing things, that can differentiate and accelerate our ability to succeed as well. So I think you're going to see pharma companies either internally building up larger capabilities from an AI analytics perspective, but I also think you're going to see a heck of a lot more partnership with their existing vendors, challenging them to do more. So we talked about earlier compliance, things like that. I'd be surprised if in the next few years, every clinical trial management system doesn't have either natively or bolted on top of it some AI capabilities to automate and augment site monitoring, patient tracking, et cetera. So I think you're going to start seeing pharma companies demanding more from their vendors, from their CROs, and from their partners.
Well, I was curious to that point about pharma companies becoming more like tech companies. What advice you would give them in order to make that switch and adopt the not everything that tech companies have, but the things that are relevant. One of the things that you mentioned there is obviously building your own capabilities. You also talked about the partner ecosystem and working with them. Would love your thoughts on, given that this is coming down the pipe, what should leaders be doing?
Yeah, so I think to me, there's one main sort of umbrella, and then there's a couple things under it. I think it's pushing your people and your organization to be more data driven and more data literate. Right now, again, we have folks who hear about AI and all they think about AI is, hey, I know ChatGPT is on my phone and I can ask it cool questions. It obviously has a lot more capabilities than that AI analytics. I don't think a lot of people are even aware of what it can be. So I think everyone, especially those outside the IT departments, need to be given a primer of, hey, what is possible? The art of the possible is a traditional thing you talk about a lot. And I think most people don't even think about that when it comes to AI. They're too busy focused on, hey, my vendor rolled out a new capability. I have this new cool widget or a new button and I'm happy now. I think they're not pushing themselves hard enough to think about, hey, how can we actually improve our operations via automation? And I think some of it's they're just waiting on tech vendors to push them. I think some of it goes back to our discussion earlier about people being scared of, hey, I don't want to make myself irrelevant or obsolete. But I think, again, if we're able to improve and automate certain things, to me, it's not a worry about, hey, pharma companies are going to get rid of folks. They're going to bring a heck of a lot more treatments to market. They're going to have a lot more clinical trials to run, a lot more compounds to explore. So I think it's being able to be enthusiastic and optimistic of, hey, what does the ideal nirvana for this process look like? How can AI or analytics or data just help us drive there? And then understanding both during that process, hey, what do we need from our tech teams, from our vendors, et cetera, to get us to that point? But sometimes the harder challenge is, what do I need upstream? What data do I need to make AI do what I need it to do? We all lament in the industry how there's so many systems that are full of junk data, things like that. And that's going to give you junk results. So I think it's taking a conscious effort to analyze, hey, what data are we generating during our discovery process, during our clinical trial execution processes, confirm that we're collecting the relevant things, the right things, and we have controls in place to make that data clean and good, and then be able to then tap and put AI on top of that.
I mean, there's so many things in what you just said there. I mean, one of them sounded like, well, this isn't build versus buy. This is both. There's your vendors are going to be providing you more AI-enabled features, but those are going to be generic. Those are probably going to be high level. You should take advantage of them. You should totally use them. But there's so much more that you're going to need to do. You're going to need to customize and create your own tools that align with your own data and your own processes. And you're probably going to be working with an ecosystem of different tools and technologies. It sounded like there's also the people process element of this. It's don't view this as something which you can just plug in. There's going to be change management. There's going to be transformation efforts around this. You're going to need to rethink how you're doing your processes, your operating models. That was in there as well, and it needs to be end-to-end, proactive. You need to be looking at all of those opportunities across that life cycle, and starts with the data, but it goes all the way through to in the analytical life cycle, the AI-based solutions that you're building, and in the development life cycle and the clinical life cycles, it's getting into the hands of clinicians, patients, or in the form of treatments and therapies. What did I miss from that? Because there was so much that you covered there. Were there other things that you wanted to leave folks with as, you should do this?
Yeah, no, I think you summarized it pretty well. To me, it's be cognizant and respectful of the key stakeholders you're dealing with during any given process. During drug development, you obviously have scientists, you have clinical operations, those regulatory folks. I'll call those the business. You have business folks, you have IT folks who are responsible for the systems, responsible for wrangling the data, making it clean, etc. And then you have compliance folks. I think a lot of times decisions are made and focus one stakeholder group and neglecting the others. I think AI gives us the ability to satisfy all of those stakeholders in a more efficient manner. Again, by being able to put in compliance, governance, et cetera, onto your AI models, you're able to ease sort of the heartburn that your regulatory or your compliance folks feel all the time, because they have more confidence. Hey, we have the process guardrails in how we do things. We're following our SOPs, we're following regulations, et cetera. So that obviously makes them happy. Having those process guardrails also allows you to optimize process execution, which makes your business, actual people, foot on the ground, workers happy, but also makes their leadership happy. Because again, you're being more efficient, you're being more timely, you're being more responsible with resources. And then I think IT has less fire drills to deal with. Again, if you have the right process in place, if you have the right ecosystem of technology, IT isn't just the person you call to restart your computer. They're actually there to be able to provide value and provide you capabilities that you haven't even thought about sometimes.
Yes, work with your business partners internally, whether it be the IT teams, the analytics and data science teams. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. If folks want to get in touch with you, what's the best way that they should reach out?
Yeah, probably LinkedIn is the easiest way. I'm the only Chris McSpiritt on there. It's not a common last name, so feel free to reach out to me and I'll connect with you and get in touch.
Excellent. And for folks generally, we are going to have a follow-up episode later on about what's next in enterprise AI, where we're looking at those trends more generally outside of life sciences. So please do join us for that as well. Thank you so much for joining us and our time. And, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you very much, everyone.
You've been listening to Data Science Leaders from Domino Data Lab. If you found our discussion insightful, be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. Your support helps us deliver cutting-edge content and keep the data science community informed and inspired. We appreciate every review. Until next time.